The rain had fallen on Hollowbeck for 12 days without stopping, and on the 13th night, the wind turned and came in off the moor. Hesper heard it change. She was in the small back room she used for the accounts, and the candle leaned through the window was shut fast. She put her hand flat on the ledger to keep the pages from lifting. Behind the stable, the elms had begun to move altogether, which they did only when the wind was truly high. She was 4 miles from the market road. She was 9 miles from anyone who could have helped her. She was alone in a house with 40 rooms, and she had grown used to that the way a person grows used to a cold that never quite leaves the stone. She looked back down at the ledger. 1,140 bundles of flax redding in the pools below the mill, due to be lifted in 10 days and carted to Kelsham by the 20th of the month. If they went on time, the year came right. If they did not, it did not. Her eye caught, as it always caught, on the entry near the bottom of the 3rd column, a debt of £800 owed to a bank in Bristol, marked settled, in a hand that was not hers. She had asked twice who had paid it. She had been told twice that the matter was closed. She had stopped asking. Then she heard the bell. She froze with the pen in her hand. It came thin and far off through the wind, and she thought she had imagined it, because the flood bell at the mill had not been rung once in her 4 years at Larkmoor. Then it came again. 3 strokes, a pause, 3 strokes. Not the wind in the frame. She was out of the chair before the pen had finished rolling off the desk. She took the back stairs, pulled her boots on standing with one hand against the wall, and took her father's old riding coat from the peg because it was heavy and because it was nearest. The kitchen door came open against her shoulder, and the wind tore it out of her hand and slammed it into the wall behind, and she left it swinging and went out into the dark. The yard was ankle deep. That was the first thing that told her how bad it was. Larkmoor sat on a rise, and the yard had never held water in her life, and now it was moving across the stones in a sheet, carrying straw and hen feathers and a wooden pail she recognized as her own, turning slowly, going away toward the orchard. She ran. The lane to the mill was a river. She went along the high bank beside it, and twice her boots went out from under her, and twice she got up and didn't look at her hands. There were lights ahead. Not one light. 8 or 10 of them, moving. Half the village was already down there in the dark, and nobody had sent for her because there had been no time. The lead had gone. She stopped for 1 second to understand it, because a thing that size takes a second. The mill lead ran a 1/4 mile from the weir to the wheel, and it ran above the level of the Redding pools, and it had been built that way in her husband's grandfather's time. Now the bank of it had opened near the middle, a gap the width of a cart, and the whole weight of the river was coming through it and down the slope toward the flax. 1,140 bundles, 10 days from lifting, the whole year. Wilkins Sparrow found her in the crowd, soaked through, his hair flat to his head. He was 17. He had been the boot boy when she came to Larkmoor, and now he kept her books. "Your Grace, we have had a dozen men on it since 10 o'clock. It takes the stone as fast as we put it in." "Then stop putting stone in it," she said. He stared at her. She was already looking past him, up the slope, at the shape of the land. She had walked that ground in every season for 4 years, and most often when she had no other way to think. The fallow lay lower than the pools. She knew what was in the fallow, which was the winter grazing for every beast in Hollowbeck. "The lower hatches," she said, "at the weir. Open all 4. Damaris Fenn had come up beside her. She was 61 years old. She ran the weaving shed. She had buried a husband and 2 sons, and she did not frighten. "That will take the fallow," Damaris said. "I know what it will take. Every acre of the grazing. I know what it will take. Fighting the water at the gap is losing. We have not the stone, and we have not the hours. open the weir above, and the river goes where we send it. It goes through the fallow, and down to the brook, and away, and the gap runs slack, and the pools stand." Damaris looked at her for one long moment in the lantern light. Then she turned round to the men behind her, and put 2 fingers in her mouth, and whistled so loud it cut clean through the wind. The hatches had not been lifted in 12 years, and the iron had seized. They worked at them with crowbars in water up to the thigh. Hesper took a bar herself and set her boot against the frame and hauled, and the metal was cold enough to burn, and the bar slipped on the second pull and took the skin off the heel of her left hand. She wrapped it in her sleeve and went back to it. She did not stop. The rain came sideways and filled her collar and ran down inside her clothes to her boots. She did not stop. Someone shouted that the 3rd hatch was coming, and she went to the 3rd hatch. She did not stop. The first went up a little after 2 in the morning. The second came an hour behind it. The 3rd and the 4th went together, and the sound the river made when it turned was not a crash, but a long, low sigh, as though the water had been waiting 100 years for somebody to give it permission. They stood and watched the fallow fill, 20 acres of good winter grass going under, black and shining in the lantern light, and the men were silent, because they were watching their own beasts eat nothing in February. Below them, the gap ran slack, and then slacker, and then it was only a wide, wet mouth with a thread of water in it, and the pool stood exactly as they had stood at supper. The boy from the turnpike found her then. He had been looking the better part of 2 hours, and had gone first to the house, and found the kitchen door swinging open in the dark. He held out a letter. It had come to Kelsham on the mail and been sent on. Heavy paper. The seal unbroken. Hesper looked at it. Her hands were bleeding, and her sleeve was in ribbons, and she had 20 acres under water, and the whole crop still to lift. She put it in her coat pocket without turning it over. She did not care whose seal was on it. She only cared that the pools were standing. "Take the men to the shed," she said to Damaris. "There is a fire in it, and bread in the far cupboard, and beer. Nobody walks home wet." Then she went up the lane in the gray beginning of the light, past the swinging door, and she did not go inside. She went round to the terrace where she could see the whole of the low ground at once, and she stood there in her ruined coat and watched the water she had let in lie shining across the fallow like something spilled, and she counted what it would cost to buy hay through the winter for every cow in the village. She was still counting when the sun came up. She slept 3 hours in a chair and woke because her hand had stiffened in the night, and the pain had gone from hot to deep. Damaris came in with a basin and did not ask permission. She unwound the sleeve and looked at the heel of the hand and made a small sound with her tongue against her teeth, and she washed it, and she bound it in clean linen, and she did all of it without speaking. The coat lay over the back of the chair. When Damaris lifted it to hang it, the letter fell out onto the flagstones. Hesper looked at it a moment. Then she picked it up with her right hand, because her left would not close, and turned it over. The seal was black wax. The device pressed into it was a heart at bay between 2 oaks, and it was the mark of a house that had put its stamp on nothing sent to Larkmore in 4 years. Damaris had stopped moving by the fire. Hesper broke it. The paper opened stiffly. There were 6 lines, and she read them standing up. Then she read them again. "Your Grace," Damaris said. Hesper folded the letter along its own crease and set it on the table beside the basin of pink water, and put 2 fingers on it, and held it flat, as though it might get up. "He is coming home," she said. "He lands at Whitby. He will be at Larkmore in 9 days." The fire moved in the grate. Out on the low ground a curlew went over, calling, the way they did when water lay where water did not usually lie. "Does he ask anything?" Damaris said. No, said Hesper. He does not ask anything at all. And that was the part she did not understand. She had been married to him for 18 months before he went, and for 4 years after. Her father was Josias Quinnell, a wool factor of Bristol, a short, thick man with ink on his fingers, who had made a great deal of money and had never once been asked to dine by anybody who had inherited any. When the offer came from Larkmore, he read it twice and walked round the yard for an hour in the rain, and when he came in he said only, "Well, Hesper, they have got to the bottom of the barrel at last, and they have found us." It was not a love match, and nobody pretended otherwise. Larkmore was drowning. The old Duke had spent 40 years pulling money out of the land, the way a man pulls water from a well. He has stopped feeding, and when he died, he left his son a title, 11,000 acres, a roof like a colander, and debts that had been sold on twice to people who did not care what the family had been. Hesper brought £32,000 and a head for figures. She had gone into it with her eyes open. She had been 23. She had watched her sister Mirren marry a man in Clifton who had money and manners and nothing at all behind the eyes, and had decided, well before the offer came, that she would rather be useful than adored. And it was not a bad marriage. That was the thing she could never afterwards make anyone understand, least of all her father. Evander was not cruel, and he was not cold. He was courteous in a way that never slipped. He asked her opinion on the drainage before he asked anybody else's. Once in the second winter, he had come into the estate room at midnight and found her still working, and had sat down across from her without a word and worked beside her until 3. They had talked about Lyme. It was the happiest night of her life, and she had never told him so. What broke it was the plan. By the second summer, the settlement had been eaten, and the debts were still hungry, and Evander brought a man up from London who spread a map on the long table and explained, in a warm and reasonable voice, that the estate could be made solvent inside a year. The method was simple. Sell the whole of the low ground, every tenancy from the mill to the parish boundary. 91 families. The land would go to a company that meant to drain it and run it as one holding. Hesper asked one question. She asked where the families would go. The man from London said that was not properly a question for the vendor. She refused. She refused quietly, and she refused once. She said that she would not put her hand to it, that £32,000 of her father's money was in the fabric of that house, and it gave her a voice, and that she would rather live in 3 rooms of a ruin among people who knew her name than live comfortably on the price of 91 families. Evander looked at her across that table for a long time. Then he said, very evenly, that she did not understand what she was refusing, that the estate would go under, that it would take her down with it, and that he would not stand and watch that happen. They argued 4 days. It got worse each day. On the 4th day, he said the thing. He said, "Then keep it. Keep the land and the tenants, and the roof, and all of it. I am going where I can raise what this place needs by some means other than selling my own people, and I will stay gone until it is done. Or until you send for me. When you have had enough, when the winter comes, and the roof goes, and the men come to the door, you will write to me. 1 line will do. Ask me to come and put it right, and I will come." She said, "And if I don't write," he said, "you will." He left on a Tuesday. He took 2 trunks and his father's watch, and he did not take a servant. He wrote to his aunt and to his bank, and he did not write to her. And Hesper, who had been the Duchess of Larkmore for 18 months, stood at the top of the steps and watched the carriage go out through the gates, and then went inside and sat down and opened the ledger at the beginning. She did not write. It took 4 years, and very nearly did not work. The first winter was the worst thing she had ever lived through, and what nobody had warned her of was the credit. She had assumed a duchess could borrow. She learned in 6 weeks that the name of Larkmore was so far gone in every counting house between York and London that using it was worse than having no name at all. 2 merchants laughed at her. One did it to her face. So she stopped using it. She signed as Quennell, agent, and let people think what they liked about who the agent worked for. She took her father's name back onto paper and went to Kelsham on the carrier's cart like anybody else, and stood in a wool hall in Bristol at 7 in the morning among men who had known him, and sold on her own account. The Hollowbeck Company, she called it, because it had to be called something, and because the village had earned it. She put the low ground into flax, because flax paid in a season, and sheep did not. She gave the old brewhouse to Damaris Fenn and a dozen women, and they wove in it. And by the 3rd year, they were sending linen to a factor in Leeds, who had no notion he was buying from a duchess. She sold the London house. She sold the pictures, all but 2, and the 2 she kept were the ones nobody wanted. She let the west wing go dark and moved herself into 4 rooms on the north side where the chimneys drew. She cleared the 2nd mortgage in the 3rd summer. She paid the last tradesman in the 4th spring. She remembered the date and had never told a soul that she remembered it. 91 families were still on the low ground. Not one had gone. And every contract and every bill of lading and every line of credit in the ledgers on that desk stood in the name Quennell. Not one of them said Larkmore. She had built it so that it would stand whether he came back or not, and she had told herself for 4 years that this was prudence. Now the letter lay on the table by the basin, and she looked at it and understood that she had built it so that it would stand whether he came back or not. She went out to the estate room and found Wilkin already there with the flax figures, and behind him, holding his hat, the factor's clerk from Kelsham, who had ridden out at first light and had plainly heard the news on the road, because news of that kind travels faster than a letter. "Your Grace," the clerk said, "forgive me. With His Grace returning and the delivery on the 20th, Mr. Aylward will wish to know whose signature he is to look for on the contract now." The room went quiet. Wilkin looked at the floor. Hesper turned the page in front of her. Her left hand was bound and would not hold the paper flat, so she used the weight of the inkstand. "Tell Mr. Aylward," she said, "that the contract is with the Hollowbeck Company, that the Hollowbeck Company has met every delivery it ever undertook, and that it will meet this one on the 20th as agreed. Yes, Your Grace. Only the signature." "The signature has not changed," she said. The clerk hesitated. It was a small hesitation, and she saw the whole of it. "Nothing here has changed," she said. "Tell him that also." He bowed and went out. She heard his horse in the yard. Wilkin stayed where he was a moment longer, turning the corner of the ledger with his thumb. Then he said, without looking up, "Your Grace, when he comes, what will he find?" Hesper looked out of the window at 20 acres of water lying where 20 acres of grass had been. "He will find it standing," she said. She meant it as an answer, but she heard it as she said it, and so did Wilkin, and neither of them said the other half aloud, which was that a man who has been told for 4 years that he would be sent for, and who has not been sent for, does not cross a sea and come home in 9 days to look at a field. He came on the 6th day, not the 9th, and he came in the middle of the lift. They had been at the pools since before light. The flax was up out of the water and lying in stooks along the headland, and the smell of it was everywhere. That sweet, rotten smell that gets into the hair and the clothes and stays there a week. 40 people were working. Children were carrying. Damaris had the tally board propped against the gate post with the day's count chalked on it, and Wilkin was on the second cart with his sleeves rolled, taking the bundles as they came up to him. Hesper was in the mud with the rest of them. Her left hand was still bound and useless, so she worked with her right and used her forearm for the weight, and her hem had been wet to the knee since 7 in the morning. She did not see him arrive. She heard the horse. It came up the avenue at a walk, which was the strange thing. Nobody rode at a walk up that avenue. Carriers hurried, and gentlemen trotted, and the boy from the turnpike ran. And this one came at a walk all the way, as though the man on it had a great deal of time and had decided to spend some of it looking. He was taller than she had let herself remember. That was the first thing. He sat the horse the way a man sits who has been in a saddle every day for 4 years, loose and low, and his coat was good, but it was worn at the cuffs, and his face was burnt brown in a way no English winter had done. He was 37 years old. He looked older and harder and somehow lighter, as though something heavy had been taken off him, and he had not yet learned to stand without it. He came down to the pools. He got off the horse and looped the reins on the gate, and he walked past her. He walked straight past her. He went along the line of stooks with his hands behind his back, slowly, the way a man walks a field he intends to buy. He looked at the Reading pools and the new stone at the head of them. He looked at the cut of the drains. He stopped at the gate post where the tally board leaned, and he read it. And he stood there a long moment, reading a number chalked in a woman's hand. His hand came up and took hold of the top of the board. It closed on it. That was all. His face did nothing whatsoever. Hesper saw it because she was watching, and she would not have seen it if she had not been. Then Wilkin, up on the cart with his arms full, and the light behind him, and no idea in the world, called down and told him to shift, because he was standing where the wheel had to come. Evander stepped back off the track. "Beg pardon," he said. And Wilkin said, "Right you are," and swung the bundle up, and turned for the next one, and thought nothing of it at all. It went through the crowd slowly after that, and Hesper watched it travel. A woman near the water stopped, and put her hand on the arm of the woman beside her. Somebody said a word. Somebody straightened up out of the mud and stared. An old man took his hat off and then, not knowing what else to do with it, put it back on. Nobody spoke to him. Nobody knew what to call him. He had been gone 4 years, and there were children at that pool who had never once laid eyes on him. And a man may own 11,000 acres and still be a stranger, standing in the way of a cart. Damaris came off the gate and stood at Hesper's shoulder and said nothing. Then he turned round and looked at his wife. She was ankle-deep in black mud, with her sleeves pushed up and her hand bandaged, and her hair coming down out of its pins on one side. There was flax chaff on her shoulders. She had not worn a cap in 3 years because it got in her way. She lifted her chin, and she did not wipe her hands. "Hesper," he said. "Your Grace." Something crossed his face and went. He said, "They are lifting a week early. 5 days early. The water came into the leat, and we had to bring the whole crop forward or lose it." I saw the fallow from the road. "Yes." "You opened the weir?" "Yes." He was quiet. Then he said, "I would have done the same," and he said it flatly, like a man stating a sum, and it was not a compliment, and she did not take it as one. They walked up to the house together, and neither of them said anything on the way. He would not sit down in the estate room. He stood at the window with his back to it, and he took a folded paper out of his coat and set it on the desk between them and put one finger on it. "That is a draft on Coots," he said. "It is drawn in my name, and it is good today. It will clear every debt this estate has ever carried, and the arrears, and the roof, and there will be something over. I have been 4 years getting it, and there is not one penny of it that came out of the low ground or off the back of anybody who lives on it. I want you to take it." She looked at the paper. She did not touch it. She said, "May I ask what you expected to find here?" He did not answer at once. Then he said, "I expected to find you in 3 rooms with the west wing shut and the tenants gone anyway, because they always go. And I expected that you would have held on longer than any woman alive could reasonably have held on, and that it would have cost you everything, and that when I came up that avenue, you would be waiting at the top of the steps. And what did you think I would say?" "I thought you would ask me for help," he said. "I have thought about it for 4 years. I have had the whole of it by heart. What you would say, and what I would say, and what would come after. I have said it to myself in ships, and in inns, and in a room in Hamburg, with the rain coming through the ceiling. Every version of it begins the same way. It begins with you asking. I never wrote one line." "No," he said, "you did not. The fire had gone out in the grate some time in the night, and neither of them had noticed. The room was very cold." Hesper picked up the paper. She held it a moment. Then she put it back down on the desk and pushed it 2 inches toward him with one finger. "No," she said. "Hesper, you will not buy it back." He said nothing. "That estate went under 3 times in 4 years, and came up 3 times. And every time it came up, it was because 91 families put their shoulders under it, and Damaris Fenn worked a loom at 61, and a boy of 13 kept my books because I could not pay a clerk. It stands on their credit, not on yours. If you clear it all in a morning, then in 5 years, every soul between here and Kelsham will say the Duke came home and put it right, and what they did will go out of the account as though it never happened. I did not mean it as an insult. I know you did not. That is why I am telling you instead of throwing it in the fire." He looked at her for a long moment. "Then what would you have me do?" he said. "Walk it," she said. "All of it, every acre and every house. Speak to every family on the low ground yourself, and let them see your face. And do it before you sign one paper in this house, or lay out 1 shilling. You said 4 years ago that I did not understand what I was refusing. Very well. Go and look at what I refuse to sell." He took the draft up off the desk and folded it and put it back inside his coat. She saw him consider a reply. She saw him take it up and turn it over and set it down again, unspoken. And she thought, with a small, cold shock, that she had seen him do that 100 times in the 18 months she had lived with him, and had never once known what any of them were. "Very well," he said. He went to the door. He stopped with his hand on it. "Your hand," he said. "What did that?" "A crowbar," she said. He nodded slowly, as though she had told him something considerably longer, and he went out. She stood where she was for perhaps a minute after the door shut. Then she sat down on the arm of the chair, and then she got up again, and then she found that her hands had begun to shake and would not stop. It made no sense. She had said no to worse things than that in 4 years, and gone out afterwards to see about the pigs. She shook for a quarter of an hour. She was very angry with herself about it. By that evening, the whole parish knew, and by the following evening, the whole parish had decided what it meant. 2 men came up to the kitchen door after dark, brothers from the low ground, with a rabbit for an excuse. They stood turning their caps over until the elder one got to it. They wanted to know if the land was to be sold. She told them it was not. They said they were glad. They didn't go. The younger one said, only, "Your Grace, folk are saying he has come back with money, and money wants a return on it, and there is no return on us." "There is no sale," she said. "You have my word." They thanked her and went off down the lane, and she stood in the doorway and understood that her word was the only security 91 families had, and that it was worth exactly as much as a married woman's word is worth in law, which is nothing at all. There was the hay as well. She had done the figures twice and got the same answer twice. 20 acres of drowned grazing meant buying feed through to April, and that money was the money for the mill wheel, and the wheel would not last another winter. One of the two would have to go, and she did not yet know which. The note came up on the third morning on a tray, which was absurd, because he slept under the same roof. She opened it standing at the window. It said he had walked the low ground with Wilkin Sparrow and had 7 houses left to see. It said the carts went to Kelsham on the 20th. It said he asked her leave to go with them, not in a carriage and not as anybody in particular, but to load and walk beside them like the rest, because he wished to see the flax weighed and hear what it fetched. It said the delivery was hers, and the contract was hers, and the name on it was hers, and that he would not go if she would rather. He did not. It said that if her answer was no, she need not write it. She might say nothing at all, and he would take the silence for an answer, and neither of them would mention it again. There was nothing else in it. No draft, no offer, no mention of 4 years. She read it twice and took it down to the weaving shed, because there was nobody else on earth she could have shown it to. Damaris read it slowly, holding it at arm's length, moving her lips a little. Then she gave it back and said, "Well? Well, what?" "He has not asked you for the estate," Damaris said. "Not the name, nor your forgiveness, nor a place at your table. He has asked you for a day of work and given you a way to refuse without opening your mouth. That is not a man trying to get in, your grace. That is a man asking to be let stand near." Hesper looked at the note in her hand. The 20th was 11 days off. She did not answer it that day, or the next. He worked. That was the thing nobody in Hollowbeck could get over. He was up before the men and on the low ground all day. And he did not do it in a fine coat, with his hands clasped behind him. He carried. He mended a gate at the Tarrant holding because it hung, and nobody had the iron. He spent an afternoon in a ditch with the 2 brothers who had brought a rabbit to the kitchen door, and came out filthy to the shoulder. And the elder brother told that story in the shed 3 separate times. Hesper heard all of it second-hand. She stayed at the pools. She had the whole crop to weigh and grade, and told herself that was the reason. On the 5th evening, Wilkin brought up the tallies, and did not go away again. He stood turning the corner of the book with his thumb, which was what he always did. "Say it," she said. "He asked me things," Wilkin said. "What things?" "About the first winter, mostly. What we ate. Whether the roof went in the end, and where. He asked if we had sold the horses, and I said all but the 2 gray mares, and he wanted to know which 2. And I told him, and he went quiet a good while." Hesper waited. "He asked whether you had been ill," Wilkin said. "He asked it twice, in 2 different ways, like he thought I might answer different the second time. And he asked what you ate, your grace, which I did not know how to answer. So I said, 'Same as us.' And he looked at me and he said, 'Yes, of course she did.' She turned a page over that did not need turning. Then Wilkin said, with no warning at all, 'Do you hate him?' The lamp hissed. Outside, somebody laughed down at the sheds. 'No,' she said. 'He said one other thing,' Wilkin said. 'We were at the top of the barrow field where you can see the whole of it, the flax and the sheds and the new drains, and he stood a long while and said, "Not to me, really," he said. "I came home to be needed." Wilkin picked up his hat. "Only I don't think he meant it the way it sounds, your grace. I think he meant he has no work here and does not know what he is for." He went out. She sat a while. Then she blew the lamp out and went up. She saw the light on her way to bed. It was in the west wing, on the first floor, at the fourth window along, and there had not been a light in that part of the house in 3 years. She stood in the passage and looked at it for a long time. Then she took a candle and went. The door between the wings was swollen, and she had to put her shoulder to it. The cold on the other side was a different cold, older, the kind that comes up out of stone that nobody has warmed. Her candle showed her dust sheets over things, humped and gray, and the shapes under them were furniture she had not thought about in years. Her own footsteps came back at her off the marble, doubled, as though somebody were walking a little behind her, and out of step. The portraits were still up. Nobody had wanted those either. They ran the length of the gallery, dukes and their wives, everyone painted looking slightly to the left of whoever stood in front of them. And she walked under all of them with her one candle and thought, as she had thought her first week in that house, that she would rather scrub a floor than be looked at like that. The fourth room along the passage had its door open. No fire, no bed made up. A camp bed of the sort a man takes on campaign, with a rolled blanket on it, a shaving glass propped on the sill, and one trunk standing open at the foot with clothes folded in it. And on top of the clothes, a flat wooden box with a brass hasp, shut. He had told nobody he was in here. No water brought up, no coal in the scuttle, no candle but the stub in the window. She stood in the doorway a moment. Then she went to the passage cupboard where the kindling was kept, because she knew where everything in that house was kept, and came back with an armful, and knelt on the hearth in her nightgown and her shawl, and cleared the grate with her right hand, and laid a fire and lit it. It took twice. The chimney was cold, and the first light went out. She laid it again and got it going, and sat back on her heels, and watched the flame take hold of the sticks and climb. And she was thinking of nothing at all, except that the room would be warm within the hour. She heard nothing. She simply knew. She turned on her heels. He stood in the passage door with his coat over his arm and the stair candle in his hand, and he had been there long enough to have said something, and had not. He was looking at the fire. Then he looked at her, kneeling on his hearth with the ash on her hands, and she saw him take up the reply and turn it over, the way she had watched him do 100 times and never once understood. This time he did not set it down. They went down to the kitchen, because it was the only room in the house with a fire that had been burning above an hour, and because neither of them could have said what had to be said, standing in a cold doorway. He sat on the settle by the range. She sat across the table with her hands round a cup she did not drink from. "Ask me," he said. "Ask you what?" "Where I was. In a fortnight you have not asked me once, and I have been waiting for it. I did not think I had a right to it." He put his head back against the wall and shut his eyes a moment. "Hamburg first," he said. "Then Riga. Then Hamburg again for 2 years and a half. I went into flax and timber. It was the only trade I knew anything of, because I had spent 18 months listening to you talk about drains." She said nothing at all. "I could not use the name," he said. "I learned that in about the same 6 weeks it took you. Larkmore was poison in a counting house from Danzig to Bristol. So I went in as a clerk to a Scots house at £90 a year and signed myself Vane, which was my mother's name, and for 4 years, not one man in Northern Europe knew what I was. I lived in 2 rooms over a rope walk. In the 3rd year, they made me a partner, because I had a head for the northern ports, and last April I sold out. And what I sold out of is the paper I put on your desk." Hesper had not moved. "You worked under another name," she said. "Yes." "So did I." "I know," he said. "A man at the Tarrant holding told me the whole of it on my 2nd day, not knowing who I was, while we were shoring a gate. He said, we had a bad time of it, but the Hollowbeck Company got us through. He said it like it was a person. The fire settled. Then he said, "I would rather say this badly than not say it. I have been ashamed for 4 years of one sentence." She waited. "Not of going," he said. "I would go again. The place could not be carried the way it was, and I could not raise what it needed from inside it. And if I had stayed, we would have gone down together in 2 winters, and I would have watched it from a chair. I am not ashamed of going. I am ashamed of what I said in the doorway. You said I would write. I said, 'You will.' 2 words. There was never a way to take them back, because the only way was to come home, and I could not come home until I had the money. And without it, I would only have been asking you to be glad to see a man who had nothing. So I stayed and worked and let the 2 words stand." She said, "Do you know what those 2 words did? Tell me." "They made it impossible for me to ask you for anything. Ever. For 4 years. Every time the roof went, or the price fell, or somebody died, there was a moment when I could have written 1 line, and it would all have stopped. And I could not, because you had told me I would, and if I had written it, you would have been right. So I did without, and I called it strength, and there were nights I knew perfectly well it was spite, and I did it anyway." Evander sat forward with his elbows on his knees and looked at the floor. "May I ask you something?" he said. "You may refuse it." "Ask. Why did you refuse the sale? Not the reason you gave at the table. I have thought about that one for 4 years, and it is a good reason, and it is not the true one. Nobody stands up to that at 23 for a good reason." Hesper turned the cup round on the table once. Then she said, "My mother's people were tenants at Compton Very, near Wells. It was cleared when I was 9. He looked up. "I was there," she said. "My mother took me because her aunt was in it, and thought a child in the party might soften somebody. It did not. It was done lawfully, and there was a man in a good coat, with a warm voice, who explained it to them twice, very patiently, because they were slow to understand him. Nobody was struck. Nobody was dragged. It took 1 morning. She stopped. 'Go on,' he said. They were allowed to take what they could carry. And there was a woman. I never knew her name. She wasn't our family, and she came out of her house at the end carrying the door." Evander did not move. "The door," Hesper said. "She had it up on her back with the hinges still on it, and she carried it down the lane. People were laughing at her, some of them, not unkindly, the way you laugh at somebody who has lost their sense. And she went past me close enough to touch, and she said, 'To nobody, he made it.' Her husband had made that door. It was the only thing in the house that was hers, and not the estate's. And she wasn't going to leave it standing in a wall for a man in a good coat." The kitchen was very quiet. "I was 9, she said. I did not understand any of it, but I understood that a person can be moved. That was the whole of what I learned that morning. Not that they can be ruined. Everybody knows that. That they can be picked up and set down somewhere else by somebody perfectly reasonable, and that afterwards there is no place in the world that is the place they came from." She looked at him. "So when your man from London spread that map out and started being reasonable at me in a warm voice, I did not hear a proposal," she said. "I heard the door coming down the lane. Evander said nothing for a long time. Then he stood up and went out. She sat there thinking she had said too much, or the wrong thing, or both, and was still thinking it when he came back 8 minutes later with a candle and a folded paper and an inkstand under his arm. He put the paper down in front of her and turned it so she could read it. It was a deed of covenant in his own hand, and it had been written long before that night, because the ink was old and the folds were soft. It said in 12 lines that the low ground, from the mill to the parish boundary, would not be sold. let out of tenancy, drained for consolidation, or in any manner taken from the families in possession of it, during his life or his heirs, and that any instrument to that effect was void. Underneath there was a space for 2 witnesses. I wrote that in a room in Riga in the 2nd winter, he said. I have carried it 4 years. I want Damaris Fenn and the Sparrow Boy to witness it, because I want the names on it to be theirs and not a lawyer's. Hesper read it twice. Read, "There is one more thing, and then I will go up," he said. "I am not going to ask you to have me back." She looked up. "I mean it plainly. Not tonight. Not at Christmas. Not in 10 years. I said a thing to you once that made it impossible for you to ask me for anything, and I am not going to spend the rest of my life making you refuse me instead. So I take it off the table and leave it off. You may live in this house, or in Bristol, or anywhere you name, and the estate answers to you wherever you are, whether you ever speak to me again or not." "Then what are you asking?" she said. "To work until the spring," he said, "until the flax is in the ground. If you would rather, I did not. Say so tonight, and I go in the morning, and I will not write, and you will hear nothing from me except through a bank. Both of those are answers. I will take either." He picked up the candle. "Good night, Hesper." He went up the back stairs, and she heard the door at the top of them close. She sat in the kitchen a long time with the covenant in front of her and the fire going down, and she said nothing to him at all, that night or the next morning, which was in its way also an answer, and they both knew it, and neither named it. She left no reply to the note about the carts, but on the morning of the 20th, when the 6 wagons were loaded and roped, and the men stood about stamping in the cold, there was a place kept at the head of the 2nd wagon, and nobody put in it, and Evander came down the yard with his coat rolled under his arm and got up into it without a word, and Wilkin, who had held it, looked hard at the horizon. They walked the flax 9 miles to Kelsham. Mr. Aylward came out into the warehouse yard with his hat on and his book open, saw the Duke of Larkmore standing at a wagon wheel with hay chaff on his shoulders, and stopped so suddenly that his clerk walked into the back of him. Evander said good morning to him and stepped back. He stepped back and stood a little apart with his hands behind him while the flax was weighed, and did not say one word for 2 hours. Aylward wanted very badly to talk to him, and could not get at him, because every time he tried, Evander turned his head half an inch toward Hesper, which meant, "That is the person you are dealing with." Aylward was not a stupid man. He gave it up and dealt with her. It fetched 3 shillings a stone over what she had budgeted. She signed the receipt at the warehouse desk with her right hand, while her left lay in her lap, and she signed it, Quennell, and Aylward blotted it, and looked at the signature, and then at her, and then at the Duke, standing well back by the door, and something went over his face that she thought about all the way home. Then it was winter. They fell into a thing without either of them proposing it. At 9, she was in the estate room with the books, and at about 10 past, he would come in with the day's tallies and sit down at the far end of the long table, and they worked until 11. They talked about the mill wheel and whether the barrow field would take lime, and a heifer that would not come in, and a chimney that smoked, and the price of Baltic deals, and once, for the better part of 40 minutes, about the correct depth of a field drain, at the end of which she was so angry that she went to bed without saying good night, and lay awake happier than she had been in 4 years, and was disgusted with herself. They did not talk about the 4 years. They did not talk about the covenant, which lay signed and witnessed in the deed box, with Damaris Fenn's name on it, in a large, careful hand. They did not talk about Riga, or the door, or the doorway. He never touched her. Not once. Not a hand at a doorway, not a shawl put round her shoulders. Nothing. She noticed the absence of it, the way you notice a clock that has stopped in a house you have lived in for years. The hay came right in the end, and not because of money. She had made up her mind to let the mill wheel go, and had said so to nobody. And on the second Monday of December, 14 carts came up the lane from the far commons loaded with hay nobody had asked anybody to cut. The two brothers were at the front of it. They would not be thanked. The elder said the commons grass was going to waste up there, and it was no trouble, which was a lie so enormous that Hesper did not trust herself to answer it, and she stood in the yard and watched them unload 20 acres of somebody else's charity into her barn. That was the night she understood the shape of the trap. He would never ask. He had said so, and she had 4 years of proof of how far he would go to keep a word. So the asking, if there were ever to be any, had to be hers. And she could not, because she had spent 4 years not asking. Not asking was the whole architecture of her life. It was what she had built the estate on, and what she had told 91 families to trust, and what had got her out of bed on the mornings when there was no other reason. And to go to him now would be to hand him the 2 words back and let him be right about her after all. She sat in the estate room with the lamp low and did the arithmetic on it twice, the way she did everything twice, and got the same answer both times, which was that she would grow old at that table at 9 o'clock in the evening, talking about lime. She chose it anyway. That was the part she never afterwards knew what to do with. She saw the whole of it, and she chose it, and she went up to bed. Lady Ottoline Vere came to Larkmoor on the 4th of February with 2 carriages, a maid and a man of business, and she had the dust sheets off the west wing by noon. Hesper heard the house change around her. Fires were lit in rooms that had not been aired in 3 years. A chandelier came down out of its bag. By 4 in the afternoon, there was a footman she had never seen standing at the foot of the main stairs in Larkmoor livery, which she had thought was all sold, and she went past him carrying a ledger under her arm in a dress, with ink on the cuff, and he did not know who she was, and he asked her to use the other door. The note came up at 6. It requested Hesper's attendance in the blue drawing room the following afternoon. It was phrased as a request, in the way that a wall is phrased as a suggestion. Lady Ottoline was 68. She was very upright and very thin, and she had her brother's build and her nephew's eyes, and she wore gray, and she did not stand up when Hesper came in. "Sit down," she said. Hesper sat. "Tea." Lady Ottoline poured it herself, steadily, and handed the cup across without looking at her, and sat back. "So," she said, "you are the wool merchant's daughter who has spent 4 years trading my family's land under a shop name." "I am," said Hesper. "You will not deny any of it, then? That is refreshing. I had prepared for weeping. I have not got time for it." "No," said Lady Ottoline. "I do not imagine you have." She set her cup down. "Let me tell you what I know, and correct me where I am wrong. There is a duchess of this house who has been seen on a carrier's cart. There is a duchess who stood in a wool hall in Bristol at 7 in the morning, among factors, and was addressed by 2 of them as Mrs. There is a duchess who signs commercial paper in a maiden name, which I am advised is at best irregular, and at worst a thing her husband could have set aside at law any day these 4 years. My nephew has been observed loading a wagon, and there is a linen factor in Leeds who bought from us 3 years believing he dealt with a company, and has now discovered otherwise, and has told everybody he knows, because it is the best story he will ever have." Hesper said nothing. "Am I wrong anywhere?" "No," said Hesper. "You have got it all right. You have left out the part where it worked." Lady Ottoline's mouth moved very slightly. "I have not left it out. I am coming to it. It did work, and that is precisely the difficulty. Had you failed, you would be in Bristol now, and this would be a small, sad story, Nobody outside the parish would repeat. You did not fail. So it is a large one, and it has got out, and it will not go back in. She leaned forward slightly. Now, the covenant. Hesper went cold. Yes, said Lady Ottoline, watching her. I thought you might not. He will not have told you, because he did not know either, until my man looked at it last week, and I had the pleasure of writing to him on Tuesday. The low ground is not my nephew's to covenant, and hasn't been since 1811. His father put the whole of it into a strict settlement to keep it from his creditors, which is the one intelligent thing that man ever did, and under it, the ground is held by 3 trustees. I am one. My nephew's signature on that paper is worth exactly what yours is on a contract, which is the goodwill of whoever chooses to honor it, and not 1 farthing more at law. The fire cracked. Hesper kept her hand still in her lap. You may check it, Lady Ottoline said. I should in your place. I will. Good. Now I will tell you what I am offering, and understand that I am offering it, not threatening it. I am too old to enjoy threatening people. The trustees can be brought to sell that ground. 2 of the 3 are elderly and frightened, and will do as they are advised. I can also, if pressed, apply to have this estate put under the trustees' management on the ground that your arrangements are, whatever else they are, not regular. I want to do neither. What I want is a settlement. You will consent to live separately. You will go to Bristol or to Bath on an allowance of $900 a year, which is more than a court would give you, and a great deal more than you have lived on lately. In return, I will put my hand to the covenant, and so will the other 2, and the low ground will be safe in law, in perpetuity, in a form nobody can undo. Your 91 families will never be moved. I will sign it in front of you tomorrow. She set the cup down. You will notice, she said, that I am offering you everything you have spent 4 years fighting for. In writing. Secured, permanent, beyond my reach, or my nephew's, or anybody's. And the price of it is that you go away, Hesper said. May I say back to you what you have just said, so that I am sure of it? Do. You are telling me that I can have the land safe, or I can have my own life, and not both. I am telling you that you were never going to have both, Lady Ottoline said. I am simply the first person to put it to you honestly. And you think I will take it? I think you will take it, said Lady Ottoline, because you are not a romantic, and you never have been. You are a woman who does sums twice. Do this one twice. 91 families against one marriage that has consisted, so far as I can discover, of 18 months and a single winter. I have watched you long enough to know which way that comes out. Hesper sat very still. Then she said, You are right about nearly everything. I usually am. You are right that it got out and will not go back in. You are right that a wool factor's daughter in a wool hall is a thing people will talk of for 30 years. You are right that my signature is not worth what a man's is, and that his covenant is waste paper. I grant you every one of them, because they are facts, and I do not argue with facts. Then we understand each other. No, said Hesper, because none of that is what you are actually asking me, and I will not have it dressed as arithmetic. I beg your pardon. You are not asking me to weigh 91 families against a marriage. You are asking me to be moved, said Hesper. That is all it is. You are asking me to be picked up and set down somewhere else by somebody who is being extremely reasonable about it. And you have brought a good coat, and a warm voice, and a very fair price. And it is the same morning, madam. It is the identical morning. I have seen it done before, and I was 9 years old, and I have not forgotten 1 minute of it. Lady Ottoline's face did not change. May I ask you one thing in return? Hesper said. You may ask. How old were you when they told you what you were for? The room was extremely quiet. Lady Adeline's hand, resting on the arm of her chair, closed slowly until the knuckles stood white, and stayed so, and she did not look away, and she did not answer. I was married at 19, she said, at last, to settle my father's affairs. It answered very well. Yes, said Hesper. I am sure everybody told you so. She stood up. Sit down, Miss Quesnel. That is not my name, said Hesper, and it has not been for 6 years. And you have known that since the moment I came into the room. Thank you for the tea. Sit down. No, said Hesper. She walked out of the blue drawing room and down the length of the marble hall, past the footman who did not know her, and she got as far as the estate room and shut the door and put her back against it. And her legs were shaking so badly that she had to slide down and sit on the floor. Nobody saw it. That was the only thing she cared about afterwards. Nobody saw it. He was gone in the morning. Nobody had been told. The gray was out of the stable, and one bag was gone off the camp bed in the west wing, and Wilkins said he had ridden out before 6 and taken the Kelsham Road, which was the road to the London coach. Lady Adeline stayed 4 more days, and then went as well, and left no word, and the dust sheets went back over the west wing, and the footman went with her, and the house was as it had been. 2 days. Nothing. 5 days. Nothing. 9 days. And a letter came that turned out to be from a linen factor in Leeds. 12 days. On the 16th day she walked down to the fallow. It had drained by then. 20 acres of dead flattened grass lay gray and sour under a white sky, and the weir hatches stood open still because there had been no reason to shut them, and the leat was mended, and the water ran along it quietly where it was supposed to go, and none of it looked like anything that had ever been an emergency. She stood there with her hands in her sleeves. She could not tell. That was the whole of it. She could not tell whether he had gone to London to fight his aunt or to agree with her, whether he was breaking the settlement or signing her allowance, whether 4 days of silence meant he was working or meant he had finally done the sum himself and got the same answer everybody else got. She had been right in the blue drawing room. She was sure of that. She stood in the dead grass and was sure of it, and it sat in her chest like a stone she had swallowed. He came back on the 19th day at dusk, and he did not come up the avenue. She was still at the fallow. She had got into the habit of it, which she did not examine. She heard the horse on the wood road behind her, and she turned round, and the gray was standing at the gap in the hedge with its head down, and he was on foot beside it. He had been 3 days on the road, and looked it. His coat was soaked through at the shoulders. He had not shaved. There was mud to the thigh on him, and he had the look of a man who has been sleeping 4 hours at a time, sitting up in coaches. "Hesper," he said. "Your Grace." He came a little way into the field, and stopped a long way off. "I did not write," he said. "I want to say why before I say anything else, because I have had 3 days to think what it must have looked like, and I know exactly what it looked like." She waited. "I could not send you a letter that said, 'I am trying.' I have had 4 years of what a letter is worth between us. If I had written and then failed, I would have made you wait 19 days for nothing, and you would have heard it by other means, the way you hear everything in this county. So I decided to come back with it done, or come back and tell you to your face it could not be done. I know what the silence cost. I did it anyway, and I am sorry. Is it done?" He took a folded packet out of his coat. "The low ground is out of the settlement," he said. "The trustees had power to sell, so I sold it to myself, which the law permits and no honest man enjoys. And the price was the whole of the draft I put on your desk in November, and £1,200 besides. It is not in the entail, and not in the settlement. It is in a trust of its own, the rents charged to the repair of the holdings, the tenancies for 3 lives with the fines fixed, and it cannot be sold by me or by my son, if I ever have one, or by anybody after. It is signed and enrolled, and I have the enrollment in my hand." Hesper did not move. "The trustees," she said. 2 of them wanted paying, and were paid. And the third?" He looked at her. "The third would not answer my man for 6 days," he said. On the 7th, she came to the chambers in Lincoln's Inn herself, which she had not needed to do, and she read the whole instrument through twice, and she signed it, and she put the pen down, and she said one thing to me, and then she went out and got into her carriage and didn't say goodbye." "What did she say?" She said, "Tell your wife I have done the sum twice." The light was almost gone off the field. Behind the hedge, a blackbird was going off the way they do at dusk, over and over, and neither of them heard it. "I have not come to ask you anything," Evander said. "I want that understood before you say a word, because I can see you are about to speak, and I will not have you speak under a misapprehension. I gave you my word in the kitchen in November. I have kept it 3 months, and I will keep it 30 years. The land is safe, whatever happens now. It is safe if you go to Bristol tonight. It is safe if you never speak to me again. There is no bill attached to it. I did not do it to be paid." "I know that," she said. "Then that is everything I came to say." He turned to take the horse. "Wait," said Hesper. He stopped. She stood there with her hands pushed into her sleeves and found that her voice was not entirely steady, and went on anyway, because she had never in her life waited for her voice to be steady. "I have been coming down to this field since the 16th day," she said, "and I have worked something out, and I am going to say it badly. Say it. For 4 years I told myself one thing, and it got me through, and I want you to know it was not nothing. I told myself, I will not ask him. Whatever comes. The roof, the fever winter, Mirren dying in the 2nd August without me there, because I could not afford the coach. All of it. I will not ask him. And I didn't ask, and the place stands. And I would not give back 1 hour of it." He said nothing at all. "But I have had time to think," she said, "and I have worked out what I did wrong, and it is this. I confused 2 things that are not the same thing. I thought that refusing to ask and refusing to need were the same. They are not. They are not even close. And by the 3rd year, I could not tell them apart anymore, and I had built my whole life out of one, and called it the other. And it was very fine and very upright, and I was extremely proud of it. And it was also 4 years long, and cold as that house. Hesper, let me finish, or I will not get through it." He was quiet. "You said in the kitchen that you would not ask me. I understood why, and it was the decent thing, and I have hated it for 3 months. Because it means that if there is ever going to be anything said, I have to say it. And to say it, I have to do the one thing I have spent 4 years proving I would never do, which is stand in front of you and want something." She stopped. She made herself go on. "So here it is. I do not want the allowance, and I do not want Bath, and I am not going to Bristol. I want you at that table at 9 o'clock in the evening for the rest of my life, arguing with me about field drains. I want to be in the room when you are told something you do not like, because your face does a thing and nobody else sees it. And I did not know any of that until you rode out on the 6th of February without telling anybody. And I stood in this field on the 16th day and understood that I was not standing here about the grass." The blackbird stopped. "You told me not to ask," she said. "Very well. I am not asking. I am telling you that if you were to ask, my answer would not be what it was in the doorway. Evander did not move for a moment. Then he crossed the ground between them, and he did not run, and he did not seize hold of her. He stopped an arm's length away, and he stood there. "May I ask you now?" he said. "Yes." Then he said, "Will you have me back? Not because I have brought money, because I did not bring it for that. Not for the estate, because the estate is yours, and has been these 4 years, and everybody within 9 miles knows it. I am asking because I have spent 4 years in 2 rooms, over a rope walk, being right about a great many things, and wrong about the only one that mattered, and because I would rather be argued with by you at that table than agreed with by anybody else on earth." "Yes," said Hesper. He reached out and took her left hand, the bad one, and turned it over. The bandage had been off since December. The scar sat across the heel of it, a thick white seam where the crowbar had taken the skin off in the water at 2 in the morning. And there were others, older, that she had stopped noticing years ago, and the nails were short, and the knuckles were rough, and it was not a hand anybody had ever painted. He looked at it for a long time. He did not say anything about it. He put his thumb once across the seam of the scar, very lightly, and then he closed her hand and held it shut between both of his. "Come in," he said. "You are frozen. You have been out here since 3. "I have." "I know," he said. "I passed the top of the field 2 hours ago, and I turned round and rode down to the turnpike and back, because I could not think how to begin." She started to laugh, and it came out wrong, and he did not comment on that either. The covenant was read out in the shed at the harvest supper the following September, because that was where everybody was. Wilkin Sparrow read it, being the best reader present and the one who had witnessed it, and he read very slowly and got 2 of the legal words wrong, and nobody minded. 91 holdings, 3 lives, fines fixed, not to be sold. When he finished, there was a silence of perhaps 4 seconds, and then a noise went up in that shed that they heard at the mill. Lady Ottoline was there. Nobody had expected her, and nobody had quite dared not invite her. She sat at the end of the top table in gray with her back like a poker, ate almost nothing, and watched it all with a face that gave away as much as her nephew's did. At the end of the evening she came and stood by Hesper. "I said a number of things to you in the blue drawing room," she said. "You did. I withdraw none of them. I did not think you would." "They were all true," said Lady Ottoline. "Everyone. There is a woman in London this minute telling the story of the wool hall as though she had stood next to you, and there will be for 20 years. I was wrong about one thing only." "Which?" "I said that you were not a romantic," said Lady Ottoline. "I was quite correct. What I got wrong was the conclusion I drew from it." She looked out at the shed, at the trestles and the lamps and the noise. "Good night," she said, and went. In November, at a house in Grosvenor Square, a woman whose name does not matter said in a carrying voice that one hardly knew whether to address the Duchess of Larkmoor or send her an order for sacking. Lady Ottoline Vere walked 3 yards, told her she had mistaken the house and was wanted elsewhere, and stood there until she left the room. 6 people saw it. Hesper heard of it inside a fortnight and took it as it was meant. There was one more thing, and Hesper learned it by accident a year later. She was in Bristol in the autumn at the counting house of Peveril and Strood, where her father had banked and the Hollowbeck Company banked still. She was drawing on her gloves to go when an old clerk came round the end of the counter and stood in her way, plainly frightened of himself, and said, "Your Grace, might I say a thing to you?" His name was Abiel Crow. He was 70 if he was a day, and had been 41 years at that counter. "Say it," she said. "It is about the 800 pounds." She stopped with one glove half on. "I have wondered for years whether I did right," he said. "I was asked to send no word, and I sent none, and I am too old now to be turned off for it. So I will tell you. Go on." It was the January of the second year. The Larkmore account was in a very bad way, and there was 800 pounds standing against it from the old Duke's time, sold on twice, and the holder was a hard man, and meant to move on the estate that quarter, and there was nothing anybody could have done. And on a Tuesday morning, a man came in off the street. Hesper stood entirely still. "He had come straight up from the quay," Crow said. "You could smell the ship on him. He wore a seaman's coat that was not his, too small in the shoulder, and he had not shaved in a week and had no hat. I took him for a foremast, hand come about a remittance, and very nearly sent him to the other window. And he put a canvas bag on this counter and counted 800 pounds out of it in gold and Hamburg paper, and said, 'That clears the item standing against the Larkmore account, and I want a discharge in writing, and no letter sent to Larkmore, and no name in the book.' And you gave him none. I told him the item could not be settled anonymously, and he said then, 'Put it to a friend of the family,' and I did. And that is what stands in the book to this day. That is the entry, Your Grace, if you ever saw it and wondered." "I have seen it," said Hesper. "Twice a year, every year since. He asked me one question," he said, "when it was all counted and the discharge written. He asked whether the estate had written to us that quarter, asking for terms. I said no letter had come, and he said, 'Thank you,' and took his discharge and went out. And I watched him through the window, and he did not take a coach, and he did not go up toward the town. He went back down toward the quay the way he had come. I had a boy follow him, because I did not like it. And the boy came back and said he had gone aboard a Baltic ship, warping out on the tide that afternoon. He had been in Bristol 4 hours, said Hesper. Less, said Crow. He never left the street. She stood there with one glove on and one in her hand. Then she said, "Mr. Crow, you did right." She did not speak of it at Larkmore that week, or the next. She spoke of it in December, in the estate room at about 9:30, with the lamp between them and the snow coming down soft against the tall windows and the tally book open in front of him. "Evander," she said, "Peveril and Strood." He turned a page. "What of them?" "The 800 pounds. January the 2nd year." He did not look up. It was a bad debt in the wrong hands, he said. It wanted clearing. You were on the ship 4 hours. I was on the ship's business. The ship left on the tide. There was nothing to stay for. You could have written one line. He turned another page that she was fairly sure he had not read. "You would have known I was in England," he said, "and that I had money. And it was the first I ever had, and there was not another shilling behind it. And I could not have come up that avenue and called it the beginning of something, because I did not know that it was. It would have been a man showing you 800 pounds and then going away again. That is not worth a letter." She let that sit. Then she said, "There is a box in your trunk." He stopped turning pages. "I have never opened it," she said. "I have known where it was for a year." "Open it then." "I would rather you told me." Evander sat back. He looked at the window for a while, at the snow going across the dark. "It is a sheet of paper," he said. "A line for every quarter day I was gone. 16 lines. I wrote them at the counting-house desk in Hamburg when the English mail came in, and everyone says the same thing, which is, 'No letter,' and then one word after it." "What word?" He said, "Good." The lamp hissed. The snow came down. She said, "Good." because every quarter you did not write meant that you had held. That was the whole of what I could know of you from Hamburg. No letters, no news, nobody to ask, and 4 times a year one fact, which was that you had not sent for me, and I turned that fact over for 3 months until the next came. I told you in November that every version I ever ran of coming home began with you asking. That was true, and I hoped every quarter day for 4 years that you never would. Both were true at once, and I have never been able to put them in one sentence and have it make sense. It makes sense, said Hesper. Does it? You wanted to be needed, she said, and you wanted me to be all right. Those pull opposite ways, and there is no arranging them. I have had the same one from the other side. Every winter, I wanted you to walk in that door, and I would have died before I wrote a line to bring you. He looked at her across the lamp. Then he said, We are neither of us very sensible people. We are extremely sensible people, said Hesper. That is the entire trouble. He laughed. It was not a thing he did often, and it always sounded slightly out of practice, and she had come to think of it as the best sound in the house. He shut the tally book. Come to the fire, he said. The figures will keep. They will not. The Leeds account has to go tomorrow. Come to the fire, Hesper. She came to the fire. The lead was mended properly the following spring, with a stone facing and a new hatch, and the fallow came back green in the second year, and better than before, which the old men said was the silt, and would not last, and it lasted. She walked that way most weeks. She would stop at the weir and put her hand flat on the iron of the lower hatch, which was cold in every season, and stand a moment. She thought about the night she had opened them, and how the whole of her life had turned on a decision made in the dark and under a minute, which was to stop fighting the water where it was coming through, and send it instead where it could do least harm and be let go. And she thought that she had spent 4 years standing on her own 2 feet to prove that she could, and that the proof had been the making of her, and was also the only reason she could now stand beside anybody at all. She would not give the 4 years back. A woman who has never once carried a thing alone does not know what she is agreeing to when she agrees to carry it with somebody, and Hesper knew exactly, down to the last stone. Then she would walk up the lane in the late light, past the sheds and the pools, and there would be smoke going up from the chimneys of a house with 40 rooms that used a dozen, and the door at the top of the steps would be standing open, and he would be in it. Not because it was his house. He was quite clear about that and always had been. Because he had heard the gate, and he had come out.